In this video today, I'm going to speak about some common interview questions that you might hear in a PhD interview. Firstly, one of the early questions could be, why have you chosen this PhD topic? It might sound really obvious, but if you haven't prepared for this question on the spot under pressure, it could be quite hard to answer this. But what you need to do is demonstrate a passion for the topic area and give examples of that as well. So for example, in my PhD, it heavily revolved around football. So at least for me, it was quite easy to explain why football was so interesting for me, giving examples as well. So do bear in mind the topic you're interested in. How can you articulate that to the panel at the interview? Secondly, again, quite simple, but why have you chosen to apply for a PhD at this institution? And it is really, really key that you know a lot about them. They've taken the time to read your application, look you up online as well, I'd imagine, to get to know you. You need to return the favour and research the university, research the staff, not just the panel, but who else works at university, what research they're doing, not just the research that you do, but what else they do. But I think more importantly, how does the interest you have relate to their interests as well? It has to be this mutual relationship. You can't go in there just with your own agenda and hope it sticks. It does need to be mutual. This one is one I really slipped up on. I remember one interview that I had. What do you know about the process of completing a PhD? And that's why I put these videos together. I want you to understand day to day, week to week, what do you actually do when you're doing a PhD? Because I didn't know that. And when I Googled it, I couldn't really find a lot in sports science. And what I would recommend you do is, if you can find stuff on Google, great, but also discuss it with other academics as well. So week to week, what do you actually do in the office when you're doing this PhD? So it does change all the time. And if you lack the understanding, it can hold you back. As I mentioned, I was asked this question, and despite being really passionate about doing a PhD, I couldn't articulate the ins and outs of what a PhD student does. So it is really key that you understand this. Next, it's really obvious, but you need to know about the research area. You don't have to be an expert, but you will be asked questions on, well, what are the limitations of this research area? Or what is your knowledge? What is your opinion on this area? So that's why you need to do your reading. Sounds really obvious, but don't just read a few basic papers. Do really take the time to read as much as you can and gain as much knowledge. But when you answer the question, have a mixture of the science, but also have your own personal opinion. Don't be a robot that just reads off previous papers. You want to put your own spin, your own critical analysis into those papers. That's what will make you stand out when you answer these questions. Another question you might get asked is, well, what would you do if we gave this PhD? If we gave this scholarship, what studies do you want to do and how would you do them? And this can be quite daunting, really. You can feel the pressure, but bear in mind, it doesn't have to be concrete. PhDs change all the time, as I will speak about in other videos, but you do need to share some ideas. And I would give a breakdown of what you want to do. I would really think about that before you go into the interview. I'd write it down and really visualize the ideas that you have. But I would check these ideas with someone else who's maybe done a PhD or a lecturer, whoever it may be, because sometimes the studies that you have in your own head, and if you lack the experience, they're probably not very feasible in reality. So some of the studies I wanted to do at the start of my PhD just didn't work. In my head, they were great, but they weren't feasible. So you need to be very careful about the ideas you have. Do discuss them with someone else before the interview. Research is full of setbacks. Things go wrong. So you will get asked a question, if you have a setback in your PhD, how do you cope with that? You might have incidents such as people drop out your study, the funding disappears. There could be something that goes wrong basically, and you have issues, you have setbacks. This is why I would recommend you get experience. So as an undergrad, get experience in a laboratory, helping out a PhD student with their study. During your master's, the same. So when you go for a PhD interview, you can go back to these experiences and say, oh, I remember 3 years ago, I helped this student out with their study. This went wrong. This is how we dealt with it as a team. That will sound so much more impressive than just drawing back on your dissertation studies. Okay, so to summarize, I would say research the uni. Really, really key that you know who works there, you know about their research. Know your topic well. Don't be an expert, but do know it well. Do read a lot of papers around the area so you can articulate really well at the interview. Plan the PhD as well. It doesn't have to be set in stone, as previously mentioned, but do have ideas. If you kind of shrug your shoulders a little bit at the panel when they ask you this question and go, well, I don't know, I kind of assumed you had the studies in mind, it won't look great. And have backup options as well. So I just mentioned a minute ago about setbacks. Acknowledge this in the interview. Be aware that studies can go wrong all the time, things that are not in your control. So have some ideas about what you plan to do in a PhD, but also what you'll do if it goes wrong. Okay, so that was my short video on interview questions. There are plenty out there, so if you want to discuss this further and ask about more questions that I've encountered, if you're going for a PhD right now and you're a bit nervy or you've had a few not going too well, which happened to me, do speak to me at Sports Science Hacks on Instagram and at CJ Thompson 90 on Twitter. Well, okay, thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon.